Welcome to DOC NYC's inaugural Spring Showcase, our mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. My name is Karen McMullen, and I'm a programmer at DOC NYC. And it is my extreme pleasure to be speaking with Padma Lakshmi, who is executive producer and the host of Hulu's Taste the Nation. Welcome, Padma.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. It's really a joy to meet you and talk to you about this show, which I've been watching many episodes of joyfully these past few days. So thank you for creating such an exciting show.
My pleasure. Thanks for watching. I'm so glad people have responded as they have to it.
Yeah, it's great. So let's hop right in. There are plenty of other food shows, as you know. What were you looking to add to the conversation when you created Taste the Nation?
There are plenty of food shows, certainly, and I have certainly done my share of them. But most of the food shows that I was seeing on TV were, first of all, largely hosted by white males. But leaving that part of it aside, they are all pretty much either very analytical or demonstrational, sort of a stand and stir, or kind of, deconstructing it in the way that Top Chef, frankly, does, a lot. But none of the shows really address, to my mind, the emotional connection and the cultural connections of food to their origins and in their context or in their communities. And so I was interested in that. And there were a lot of those shows that were done, again, by mostly white males, like the travel food show, other than Samin's show, I would say. I used to host something called Planet Food, which were these documentary specials from years ago. So I definitely love that kind of programming. I just wanted food to have its place in current events, I guess, and not to be made in a vacuum on television. And that's why I started Taste the Nations. To me, Taste the Nation is really a political show, with a spy cover as a food show, if you will.
That's great. It is. You really do get into, the um, the issue at the border, episode one, the Mexican American border, and the disappearing of the Gullah Geechee culture and the political and cultural ramifications of that. And you're in episode two, and food is such a big part of culture, of course. And it is striking that most of these shows are hosted by white men. Can you speak to that lack of diversity?
Well, I think, there's a ton, we know there's a lack of diversity in media and in entertainment, in publishing, in television, and in movies. I started out as an actor. And so, I feel that very acutely. And I think there's also a lot of patriarchy in the professional food world. It's one of the most male dominated industries in our culture, maybe save for the military. And, being a chef is hard physical labor. The hours are terrible. It's not conducive to being a parent. So, there are inherent obstacles for women joining the professional food world as a chef. And it's usually these big name chefs who have had the opportunity to sort of gallivant around the world and just sort of be these kind of swashbuckling dudes like, oh, let me show you, like, this is where I go, or send people to, get the best fish on this iceberg. And it's a lot of bro culture, and it's great. Like, but mind you, I enjoy those shows. I am a consumer of that kind of lifestyle programming. It just seemed to me that there was room for another discussion. Food is such at the center of family, and yet we rarely see that on television, except in bits and snippets. Like even on Top Chef, we have family. We always talk about your traditions and bringing that to the workplace and stuff. But I just wanted to put that all in the center of it. I wanted to talk about kids and food, because if you're a parent, that's spent, a huge part of your day is consumed in what am I going to feed this kid that's healthy and gonna, be good for them long term. So I just wanted to talk about all the things that I felt were being discussed about food, and also use that as a way to then catch that conversation and shift it over to, well, let's look at the hands that are making this food and let's talk about them, because we love to talk about and order Thai food or get that best taco, wherever in any city. But what about the people making those tacos and that pad thai? What about them? Do we care about their humanity? Do we care that they're also a part of American culture, have helped build this nation? In some cases, that the border, that they didn't cross the border crossed them. And yet we still tell them to go back to where they came from when, all of us, except for First Nations peoples, are from somewhere else, whether it's because we were brought here against our will as enslaved West Africans in bondage, or, like my mother had a very abusive, terrible marriage and a society that would not let her lead an independent life as a divorcee. So she came as an Indian immigrant and I came with her, or, because there's a civil war, or there's like a million reasons why we are here, but we're all here. We're all afforded or supposed to be afforded the equal opportunity to become full Americans, to be treated as such by our fellow Americans as well. And, the food system in this country is run traditionally by immigrants, from the farm workers who are picking your blueberries and tomatoes, all the way to the bus boy taking your dirty dishes back to the dishwasher, washing them, or to the guy who is taking them off the truck off that farm and putting them in the grocery store shelves, to the cashier. Like every part of the food chain touches every part of our culture. So it was an easy way to talk about our culture and food in this way. I just didn't want to do a lifestyle show. I wanted food to have its proper meaning in food media once and for all culturally. And that's really, why I thought that it was useful. I thought my voice should be the one, but I think it's useful to have a whole bunch of different voices so that we hear more stories about each other, about ourselves, but also about each other.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great point of entry. And speaking of points of entry, many chefs come to their love of food through their families. A
Right.
lot of them talk about their grandmothers, right? For you, in one of your episodes, you talk about it was your mother that inspired you, even though you said she kicked you out of the kitchen a lot.
Yeah.
And then you have this show where you're teaching, or you're in the kitchen with your daughter, which is a really beautiful moment because that is what happens, right? That's where kids get their first experience. So can you talk about your formative experiences with cooking and how they've informed your love of cooking?
Sure. We lived, my mom and I lived here in New York City when I was a kid during the school year. And then in the summer, I would go back to India, even though I, got here when I was 4 and have been here since. I would spend 3 months of every year in South India. And there we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 10 people there. So, and there was a 2-burner stove in the kitchen. And, so there was always a lot of cooking out of necessity. And that's where all the action in the house was. And that's where all the decisions were being made. That's where all the big, decisions were being discussed. That's when, you could hear snippets of things you weren't supposed to hear about as a kid. And it was clear to me very early on that that is where the power lay. And so, I really absorbed a lot of life lessons while learning how to cook. And so for me, we know, because of where emotional memory is stored in the brain, and where the olfactory system is also stored in the brain, that taste is very connected to emotional memory. But for me, life lessons and food are very connected, because my grandmother often used food as metaphor because it's what was in her hand as she was trying to teach us stuff. There wasn't a lot of time to like sit down and have your lessons or have any big talks. It was like, we're going to be shucking this piece for the next hour and a half, and I'm going to teach you multiplication tables while we do it, and that's just how it was. So anything, she was always cooking, and therefore anything she was talking about, she likened it to food. So for me, I really think this was a formative experience beyond just liking to cook. I process the world through food, and I don't think it's an accident. I think it's a function of my grandma just not being able to like drop what she was doing and teach me, whether it was things in my schoolwork or just life lessons, or how, in many cases, how to actually make something. And so I learned a lot at her elbow, and she's a very practical woman. And she's going to be 90 this year. She is not a cuddly grandma, but she taught me a lot in the kitchen that was just universal about good cooking, not just Indian food. But through her, I did really learn about spices and about, cooking things, putting things in at the right time so that everything cooks to the best of its opportunity, so things like that. I mean, I think those were the most formative experiences I had. At the same time, my grandfather was a lover of books, was very well read, and had been an electrical engineer for the Indian government his whole life, but then retired at 60 and went to law school because he always wanted to be an attorney. And he loved books. He loved, 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 loved books. And he would also tutor a lot of students. So we always had a lot of students at our house in South India who would take tutoring from him. And he really taught me the love of writing and literature and books. And so I don't think it's an accident at all now, in retrospect, when I look at what my career has turned out to be, that these two people were hugely influential in my life.
Yeah, let's talk a minute about your career evolution. You've done many things, from modeling and acting to TV show hosting to what are the other things that you've done? You're an activist, you're a writer.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how they each kind of inform
That's
the
about
other?
it. I mean, I went to school for theater, and when I was studying abroad, I was a financial aid student. My mom was a retired nurse now, but my stepdad was a plumber. So I had a lot of college loans, and I was studying in Spain, and I only went to school until 1. And so I started modeling, and it was great for that. It was great for paying off my college loans. But I mean, I just did what I had to. It wasn't like, I modeled, and then I was acting, and then I wrote, to all make a living doing all of those things at once. I mean, I always tell that to young people, especially young creatives. Like, it takes you a lot longer to make it than you think you're going to need, so just be patient, and also be good with your money, and give yourself more time. Everything takes longer than you think it's going to. But yeah, I mean, a lot of those things, I was auditioning for parts, and I told you it was very hard going. Like, a lot of the time I wouldn't get the same auditions that my peers would get in acting school, and I would ask them about it. And then I would ask my agent, I would say, well, she's my age, and why didn't I get that casting? They would say, like, well, we're not going ethnic with that role. I'm talking 25 years ago, so it was a while ago. But so I would audition, I would do the modeling gig, I would also write. I had a syndicated column in the New York Times Syndicate, and also wrote for Harper's Bazaar and things. So I did a lot of that, is just doing whatever it took to make ends meet.
And so now, for this particular show, you're both the executive producer and the host of the series. Can you talk about the challenges of being both in front of the camera and behind it as well?
For me, in this project, it feels very organic because it is such a personal piece. I'm not a journalist, and before this series, I probably interviewed 3 or 4 people in my life, and they were for like somebody's book coming out, or some 92nd Street Y thing, or I'm not. So it is a very easy thing for me because the show is coming out of my head, and I have a specific point of view. It's an editorial show. And so I have really good producers who help me though. So I have my partner, David Shadrach Smith, who has great taste. And he and I work very well together. And then I also, last season, the episodes you watched were executive produced by Serena Roma, who also I think did a wonderful job show running with me, not having any experience in producing. So a lot of the times, you know, I've had a really good working relationship just with those two people, and it's really a show of very few crew, which I honestly think helps. And I also have a great DP, and you know, I've worked with a lot of camera people in my life, and Hunter Hampton, who's our DP, and I have a really good innate nonverbal communication with our body language. I know it seems awkward, but you know, I've had that when I first started in Rome. I first hosted television in Italian television for Rai when I was 27, and I had that with one of my guys in Rome. There were tons of cameramen, but I had that same thing with him. So you know it when you have it. Between my telepathy with Hunter and also such a close working relationship that I had with David and Serena, I found it very fluid. You know, because our show also relies on a lot of research. So the way that I calm my nerves is just to try and do as much research as I can. For the Gullah Geechee episode, I did a lot of research because, you know, as a non-African American person, I was very nervous. I was, to be honest, I just didn't want to get it wrong. And this was, you know, we filmed that way before the reckoning and all of that, you know, because a lot of us have been thinking about it for and very deeply for a lot longer than just last summer, you know. So it felt good to have the right story to be telling at the right moment, you know, for the American public. And so that felt very gratifying that we were able to, you know, we were thinking about these things anyway, but that enough people started thinking about them where it was just meeting the moment. And I think Taste the Nation definitely did that. You know, I think we could have never predicted the pandemic or the reckoning or anything else, but I think we really were there at the right time to serve the public what it wanted to know in a very positive way. And I'm really proud of that. For the Gullah Geechee episode, I studied my ass off, and I enjoyed doing it. By the way, if you guys enjoyed the Gullah Geechee episode, there's a great podcast. I tell everybody about it. It's called Uncivil. And it's just 6 episodes, and it's about the Civil War, but through the eyes of different people than you normally hear from. And that's really what Taste the Nation is about too. It's about giving a platform to people who don't usually get to tell their story directly to the public. You know, it's always interpreted by, you know, a white male chef, or, you know, not even chef, but it's like there's a conduit. Here, I try, and as much as that's possible, just to hand the microphone and let them tell their stories they see fit. So Uncivil is wonderful, and Mike Bigley actually recommended it to me. It is so good. I've made everybody in my crew listen to it at least 3 times, and it, you know, tells us a lot about our own history, American history, that we didn't even know. And so I uncovered all kinds of stuff like that. And, you know, the 1619 project was also very useful. I had 2 African American scholars who I would ask the same questions and whatever else came up, and frankly just cross-reference them. That's how worried I was about it, but I'm glad we were able to do that. We will continue to hopefully tell those stories.
Yeah, please do. They're really informative and entertaining. And thank you for mentioning, you know, shouting out your DP, because there is clearly something going on. It's very intimate. It's very, it feels conversational, doesn't feel very researched. And, you know, it's wonderful to hear these people tell their own stories. So, you know, as I'm watching it, I'm watching you guys, you know, sharing spoons and dipping out of the same pot. And, you know, it's like, wow, COVID. So, you know, and so much of cooking is sharing and being in close proximity with people and tasting and whatever. Can you talk about how COVID has impacted how, you know, the whole industry and specifically how it's impacted how you're doing the show.
Sure. I mean, it's, it stopped everything for everyone, right? Um, we are late. I mean, we were already supposed to have done a bunch of episodes and they should have been airing right now, for season 2, but because of COVID, we couldn't do that. And of course, the restaurant industry is just starting to come back now. And I think it's changed forever, but hopefully it'll come back and we can use this opportunity to rectify some practices that weren't really working for anybody. Um, you know, as far as paying a living wage for everybody and understanding that things cost money because some pans had to wash your produce before they were, cut into ribbons like that and all that stuff. But, for us doing the show and doing it safely, you hit on it yourself. The show depends on intimacy. And I was really afraid that we weren't going to be able to have that. That's all it's about. It's not about fancy sets. It's not about it's just people talking, in some cases, talking in a Honda, just sitting there to eat and take out, talking. So it really relies on that intimacy. And also, I was scared myself to get on a plane, but then I did get on a plane and I have been filming actually very recently. We just went back into production. And we will be back on the air in a few months in the late fall, just for holidays or like mid-fall before Thanksgiving, certainly. And we will do like a little seasonette with 4 episodes that will all be different communities, but also look at our holiday traditions through those communities to make it a little bit special, And then we'll go back into regular programming next year, but we just use tasting spoons and we don't, we have everyone tested every other day. I'm vaccinated. All my crew's vaccinated. You can't really work on it unless you are. And then we test everybody who's going to be on the show. And there's not like the hugging that there was, but we try and be just mindful, but mindful off camera. And then once, we get to talking about the issues, it's important for me that my participants feel comfortable because most of them are not camera ready, right? Most of them haven't been media trained. And most of them, I hope, are talking about really important, meaningful, deep things to them of their, about their lives. So it is, I'm not gonna lie, it is a challenge. It was hard to get back to work. I just felt like I was operating through, I don't know, bubble wrap or something, but we got through it and we're getting through it. We still have another episode to go. I was out on the road all last week. I just got home this morning, so.
Nice. So there are thousands of chefs, obviously, and restaurateurs out there with beautiful stories. How do you choose the participants that you do choose?
Well, we first choose the community and why we want to shoot there. We just, we don't just go to communities like, okay, let's do the Chinese over here, the Thai over here, and kind of, have our 4 stories and then repeat. It's much more, here's this big concept of immigration, and how can we look at this giant concept, which is very central to the existence of the United States of America as a nation and as a superpower, is so important. How do we look at all of the nuances and the different facets of this huge issue called immigration? And so I needed to go to the indigenous communities because if I was going to talk about American food and what it is, I needed to see what it was and what existed here and still exists today before anything else came. So that was about food sovereignty, not just about Native Americans in Arizona, the Navajo, Apache. And then for the Thai immigrants, we didn't just go to the largest Thai community in America, which probably would be Los Angeles, if I had to guess. I think so. My research memory is correct. But we wanted to go to Las Vegas because there was an important story to tell that was really just all female, which was that there was an enclave of these Thai war brides who came over with GIs during the Vietnam War because they were stationed in Thailand, and these women worked in the restaurant there. But there is this huge enclave because of all these war brides that came over, and there's now this Air Force base in Las Vegas. And so there we wanted to look at that community, which was also, most of them did not speak English well, never mind reading English. They, didn't have a trade or a skill per se. And we wanted to look at how a community starts and gets transplanted to a totally different area of the world, totally different weather patterns, doesn't even have family or a mate who is of their culture. How do they create something out of nothing? Out of the desert, like out of Las Vegas. How does that happen? And so it allowed us to look at how you really have to start from zero and nothing. And so we looked at that facet of it with the Thais. So it's not necessarily like, how do we choose where we want to go to? It's like, what story are we trying to tell, and who is the best community to tell that story? Because hopefully, as we get a greater library of more and more episodes, you will start to see this mosaic where you see, how do you, if you are an enslaved person, have an identity that is yours, that is not given to you because so much of your identity has been erased? How do you reinvigorate that? And you do it through reinvigorating the Gullah language. So we're looking at that facet of immigration. It is immigration, even if it's forced migration. But we're looking at what issues that community has to go through to also understand. And hopefully in a few years, we'll have 100 of these. And you'll be able to see different stories that affect us all, told through the people it affects most acutely or interestingly or specifically for some reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wonderful to hear from these smaller regions, the St. Helena Island. I actually went to, but I learned more from your show than I did when I was there. So seems like you have it's beautiful. It seems like you have a dream job
I
talking
do.
about food, eating food with people who love food all day. But it can't be 100%, without its challenging. What are the most difficult aspects of creating this series?
The most difficult aspect of creating this series is being away from my daughter.
Mhm.
I have 2 TV shows and they both require me to travel away from home. Out of 18 seasons or 17 seasons for me of Top Chef, only 2 have filmed in New York. So I go away and I take her with me, but she's getting to an age where she really, can't be taken away that much from school. That's the hardest part. The other part is also just the wear and tear physically that it takes on me to eat all that food. It seems like a high class problem to have, and it is. I sit on my ass, I eat food, and I talk to people, whether it's on that show or this show, and it's great. But I'm a 50-year-old woman, and my metabolism isn't what it used to be when I was in my 20s, modeling lingerie. So I have to go to the gym all the time, which I enjoy doing, but it's time consuming. So you have to really make that a priority and factor it into the day, because it really, really adds up. I mean, when I do a season of Top Chef, I gain like 15 pounds, 10 to 15 pounds, usually, yeah, closer to 15 in 6 weeks. And it's hard, but I just sort of excuse myself while I'm filming and say, okay, I'm doing something more important right now. And when it's over, I will, really be mindful of what I eat and be at home, and it'll be, fine. I can go to the gym. But when it takes me 6 weeks to gain, it takes me 12 weeks to lose. It's a constant push and
I'm gonna
pull.
say,
But I do have clothes in 3 different sizes in my closet at all times.
they say a minute on the
Yeah,
lip,
because
you're on the hips.
you look bigger when you're trying to get into a smaller size, just to see if you can fit in them. Just buy the bigger size. You actually look slimmer. No one's looking at your jeans.
Good tips. Um, so other than the like really beautiful visual look of the series is I found the music amazing.
Thank
Really,
you.
really beautiful for each episode, without being pandering to the ethnicity portrayed there, yet still being authentic. Can you talk a little bit about your musical people?
Sure. We always want more budget for a music supervisor, which I think we could really use because we're all just doing it. But I mean, there is somebody, but we find bits of music all over the place, and I'm a very auditory person. So when I'm listening to the cuts and I'm giving notes, I'm giving musical notes as well because it's very important to me. And also, I am very aware of the cooking noises too, you know? And so, even in the intro music, when you hear that iron thing break the dosa in half, like that's very purposeful. That intro to the show also is a real hodgepodge of world musical instruments. So my girlfriend Reka and I, who have been friends for years and years and years, she is a music icon. That's the only way I can describe her. If you are of South Asian descent and you grew up in New York in the 90s or 80s, or sort of, she's been doing. She's a DJ and she's been doing this Indian dance hall night like once a month for the last 20 years. It stopped now, but and she's also done really interesting things musically. So I knew that I wanted her. She's actually in the India episode, but I knew I wanted her to help me design the theme music. And so, you hear banjo in it, you hear African drums in it, you hear tabla, but you also hear Peruvian, instruments. And it was very important to reflect that sound, that beautiful sound in a modern way, though, because just as like a Chinese American making a dish here today is not going to be exactly the same as somebody who never left China. The music is also tweaked a little, right? And so that was important to show through sound. So the music is immensely important to me and to David, I think.
It really works. I think it's enjoyable. It's really good for with the show. I like it.
Thank you.
Um, what was I going to say? Let's see. Well, you're around all these amazing communities, talking to all these fabulous people. There must be a lot that doesn't make it into the final show. Can you share some of your favorite anecdotes that maybe didn't make the final cut?
Sure. I mean, we have so much stuff and we do it on purpose because we really do want um, we don't want to tell the story before we go there. We know what we're looking for, but a lot of times you will uncover something in production that is just changes the whole way that you're going to tell that story, and it should. And so, but then there are things that we just don't have time for, like in that interview in the Persian episode. What episodes did you guys see?
I saw Mexico, the Indian one, the St. Helena one, and I started another one. But those are the ones I saw in full.
Okay, well, in the Persian episode, I'm doing an interview with somebody named Hamid, who has this restaurant, Shamshiri Grove, which is an institution in Los Angeles and Westwood. And um, he actually, during that interview, he talks about how he killed a man in his restaurant who came in. And but we don't even, I mean, it's incredible. I'm sitting there with this guy, I'm getting his whole life story, but we just didn't have time for it. We didn't have time for it. So we had to cut out the whole thing about how he killed this guy because it just was not germane to the story we were telling, which was the immigrant story. It just, the fact that he killed this guy says a lot about Hamid and his strength and his fortitude, but has nothing to do with him being Iranian. It's just like it was a robbery story or something. So we just didn't know how to put it in. And then I was like, oh God, he's told me this. And now how do I feel, how is he going to feel about bearing his soul and I'm not putting it in? But, I keep in touch with a lot of our participants, and I've spoken to him several times in the last couple of years. I would say check in with him once every 3 or 4 months, and he's never mentioned it. So either he forgot he told me, or he's fine that it's not there. But that's one thing that comes to mind.
That's a doozy.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I could talk to you for a very long time. I really love the show, and I wish you very much success with it.
Thank you.
Before we wrap, can you just tell us about the next episodes that are coming up, your holiday specials?
Sure, we're doing 4 holiday specials. We will be doing all the major holidays at that time, and just doing different communities to help us illustrate them. We are going to Massachusetts. We are going to Miami. We are going to Los Angeles and New York. So those are the cities we'll be in. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to tell what communities we're going to. I don't think it's a big deal, but I'm interested to see what you guys think.
Well, we look forward to seeing them. Thank you again so much for a beautiful show, and thanks for stopping by to talk with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.